For more of this kind of content, you can subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment. The vast expanse of space stretched endlessly beyond the panoramic windows of the Zyrean flagship, Valoria. Inside its grand corridors of luminescent blue metal, Princess Lucy moved with calculated grace. The very walls pulsed with energy, responding to the presence of the Empire's heir, a being of supreme telepathic prowess. She had always known the thoughts of those around her, their desires, their fears, their secrets. The moment someone entered her presence, their mind became an open book, their deepest urges unraveling before her like whispered confessions. No one could hide from her, until now. The human stood in the center of the imperial chamber, his dark eyes unwavering as they locked onto hers. He was tall, his body powerful beneath the black uniform that clung to his sculpted form. Thick black hair framed his face, and his chiseled features radiated an intensity she had never encountered before. Lucy's heart pounded a sensation she hadn't felt in years. Something was wrong. She reached out with her mind, expecting the usual flood of thoughts, but there was nothing. Silence. A shiver ran down her spine. Impossible. She narrowed her glowing blue eyes, concentrating harder. Still nothing. Her fingers twitched at her side. The entire room had gone still, as if the Zyrean nobility sensed the anomaly. They had all gathered to witness the first official meeting between the Empire and Earth's representative. And yet, Lucy was the only one who realized that something far more dangerous was at play here. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice smooth yet laced with curiosity. The human's lips quirked into a small smirk, the barest hint of amusement flickering in his otherwise unreadable expression. "John Carter, Earth's appointed envoy," he said, his deep voice resonating through the chamber. He bowed, but it was not the submissive bow of a lesser being acknowledging royalty. It was something else, calculated, deliberate, defiant. She should have been furious. No one dared to defy her, not even in the smallest of ways. But instead, she felt something else entirely. Intrigue. She took a step closer. "You are different," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "I get that a lot," he replied, that smirk widening just slightly. Lucy studied him, her green hair cascading over her shoulder as she tilted her head. He was strong, his muscles coiled beneath his uniform, his stance unwavering. Most men bowed before her in mind and body. He did neither. She clenched her fists. This was unacceptable. A mystery she could not solve, a mind she could not read. She would get to the bottom of it. "Tell me, John Carter," she said, stepping so close that the heat of his body brushed against her cool blue skin. "Are all humans this resistant?" John held her gaze, unfazed by the closeness. If anything, his dark eyes flickered with something more, something challenging. "I guess you'll have to find out, Princess." The way he said her title sent an unexpected thrill through her veins. No reverence, no fear, just raw confidence. Lucy's lips parted slightly, her breath hitching for the first time in her life. The game had begun. Lucy had spent her life manipulating minds, bending wills with the slightest whisper of thought. She had never needed words to seduce, to command, to dominate. But now she stood before John Carter, a man whose mind was locked away from her, his thoughts a mystery she could not unravel. And it infuriated her. The negotiations between Earth and the Zyrean Empire were scheduled to take place over several weeks. That meant John would remain aboard Valoria under her watchful eye. She told herself this was merely a tactical curiosity, a potential threat she needed to assess. But as the days passed, that logic began to fray. She tested him. During formal dinners, she brushed against him, waiting for some hidden desire to leak through. When he sparred with her elite guards, she observed him closely, expecting frustration or arrogance to slip into his mind. Nothing. John Carter was a fortress. One evening, Lucy decided to push further. She summoned him to her private chamber, an opulent space filled with the soft glow of bioluminescent flora, the air laced with the faint, intoxicating scent of Zyrean nectar. She lounged on a velvet chaise, one leg draped elegantly over the other, her form clad in the flowing silks that accentuated every perfect curve. John entered, his gaze sweeping over her without hesitation. His confidence was unshaken, his composure infuriatingly intact. "You summoned me, Princess?" he asked, his deep voice betraying no emotion. Lucy studied him, letting the silence stretch, watching for any flicker of discomfort. He remained still. "Do you know why you're here?" she asked, rising slowly to her feet. His lips twitched. "To discuss diplomatic relations?" A smirk touched her full lips. "Oh, we'll discuss relations, all right," she purred, stepping toward him, deliberate and slow. "I find you intriguing, John Carter. Do you know why?" "I can make an educated guess," he said, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "You can't read me." Her smirk widened, but inside, she bristled. He knew. And worse, he found amusement in it. She stopped just inches from him, tilting her head. "Does that make you feel powerful?" she asked, voice laced with challenge. He let out a low chuckle. "I don't need to read minds to know power, princess, but I think it drives you crazy not knowing what I'm thinking." Her blood heated. He was taunting her. A human. A species she should be above. She reached out, letting her fingers graze his forearm, her nails teasing his skin. "I could make you tell me," she whispered, voice dripping with dark promise. John's smirk didn't falter. If anything, his dark eyes flashed with something deeper, something dangerous. "You could try." Before she could respond, he reached out first. Faster than she expected, he grabbed her wrist, not harshly, but firmly, his grip unyielding. The shift in power sent a jolt through her, an electric current sparking down her spine. For the first time in her life, someone was resisting her. She could have easily broken free. She was stronger, faster, and her telepathic abilities far exceeded his. But she didn't pull away. She didn't want to. Their gazes locked, heat simmering in the air between them. For a split second, Lucy was no longer a princess, no longer a telepathic ruler, just a woman facing a man who did not bow to her. And for reasons she couldn't yet understand, she liked it. "Careful, human," she murmured. "You're playing a dangerous game." John slowly released her wrist, stepping back, but not in submission. "Funny," he mused. "I was about to say the same thing to you." Lucy clenched her fists as he turned and left the chamber, the door sealing shut behind him. For the first time in her life, she was the one left wanting more. The game was no longer just hers to play. The royal gala was a spectacle of cosmic grandeur. The domed ceiling of Vailoria's grand hall shimmered with starlight, casting an ethereal glow over the gathered nobility. The scent of exotic Zyrean flora mingled with the rich aroma of rare galactic wines. Towering crystalline structures pulsed with soft blue light, illuminating the extravagant event where powerful alliances were forged and fragile ones shattered. Princess Lucy was the centerpiece of the night, clad in a form-fitting gown of shimmering indigo silk, embroidered with symbols of the Empire. She was elegance and authority incarnate. Her green hair cascaded down her back in intricate waves, her radiant blue skin flawless under the glow of the chamber. Every eye in the room was on her, but her eyes, they were searching for one man. John Carter stood near the edge of the room, his presence a stark contrast to the refined atmosphere. He wore formal Earth attire, a tailored black suit that clung to his broad frame, but there was no mistaking him for anything other than what he was, a warrior. His sharp, calculating gaze swept the hall, ever watchful, ever unreadable. Lucy clenched her fists. He had haunted her thoughts since their last encounter. The way he had gripped her wrist, the way his smirk had taunted her, the way his mind remained a void, untouched by her power. It was maddening, addictive. And now, tonight, she was expected to announce her arranged engagement to Prince Varek, a strategic alliance that would strengthen her empire. But her mind was not on her future fiancé. It was on him. She caught John's gaze across the room. He was watching her. Heat spread through her body. She was used to being the one in control, the one who dictated the tempo of desire. But tonight, she was unraveling, ignoring every rule of decorum, every warning of consequence. Lucy turned and walked straight toward him. John didn't move. He didn't bow. He didn't avert his gaze like every other man did. He simply watched her, the corner of his mouth curling into that damnably confident smirk. The moment she reached him, she murmured, "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. He hesitated for only a second before following her through a side passage, away from prying eyes, deeper into the secluded corridors of Valoria. The tension between them thickened with each step. The further they moved from the grand hall, the harder Lucy's pulse pounded. What was she doing? This was dangerous. He was dangerous. And she had never wanted anything more. The moment they entered a dimly lit chamber, the door slid shut behind them. John turned, arms crossed over his chest. "You keep pulling me into dark corners, princess. I'm starting to think you have a thing for me." Lucy's breath caught. His voice smooth, teasing, undeniably seductive, coiled around her senses. "Don't flatter yourself, human," she murmured, stepping closer. John didn't step back. He never did. "Then why am I here?" he asked, his tone calm, measured, but his dark eyes burned with something else. She didn't know how to answer, so she didn't. Instead, she reached for him, fingers brushing against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath the fabric. Strong, steady, unaffected, or just as lost in this as she was. His hand shot up, fingers wrapping around her wrist, not forceful, not cruel, just control. Careful, he murmured. You're playing a dangerous game. Lucy shivered. He had said that before, and this time she realized he was right. She had spent her life inside other people's minds, knowing exactly what they wanted before they even admitted it to themselves. But John was a mystery, a challenge, and she was falling into him. For the first time, she was the one who didn't know what would happen next, and she craved it. Lucy had spent her entire existence hearing the deepest, rawest desires of others. The moment she locked eyes with someone, she knew what they craved, what they feared, what they would never speak aloud. But John Carter, silence, and that silence was consuming her. She should have stepped away in that dimly lit chamber, should have reminded herself of her duty, of the empire that relied on her. But instead, she remained locked in place, her wrists still caught in his firm grip, her body thrumming with an unfamiliar hunger. His fingers were warm, roughened by years of combat. He wasn't like the Zyrean males she had known, obedient, reverent, easily swayed. No, John fought back, and that made him dangerous. Let go, she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she meant it. John held her gaze for a long, weighted moment, his thumb brushing lightly against her pulse before he finally released her. But he didn't move away. Why do you keep bringing me here, princess? His voice was low, steady. What is it you really want? Her heart slammed against her ribs. She could have lied. She should have lied. But instead, she did something reckless, something that defied every law of logic. She reached out, placed her palm against his chest. I don't know, she admitted, hating the vulnerability in her own voice. For the first time, she didn't have control. John inhaled sharply, his muscles tensing beneath her touch. His dark eyes burned into hers, and for a split second, she thought, this is it. He's going to break. He's going to want me. But instead, he stepped back. Lucy blinked, stunned. No one had ever resisted her. You don't like not being in control, do you? John murmured. She clenched her fists. No. His smirk returned, infuriating and infinitely dangerous. That's what scares you, doesn't it? Her pulse spiked. He saw too much. She turned sharply, her gown flowing behind her as she stormed toward the door. This was a mistake. Before he could respond, she was gone, slipping back into the grand hall, back into the world she could control. But the damage was already done. 2 weeks later, she was obsessed. Lucy found herself drawn to John in ways that made no sense. She sought him out during training sessions, under the guise of studying Earth combat tactics. She lingered in his presence longer than necessary, watching him with an intensity she couldn't understand. She tested him. She teased. She taunted. Yet every time, he held his ground, his dark eyes challenging her, never giving her what she craved, never breaking under her touch. And gods, she wanted him to break. Tonight, she pushed further. Under the guise of combat training, she lured him into the Zyrean gravity chamber, a place where warriors trained in heightened conditions. The chamber's artificial gravity shifted, making every movement twice as heavy, every breath a struggle. John arrived in his usual form-fitting combat attire, his broad shoulders and sculpted form making it difficult to focus. You want another lesson? He asked, stretching his arms, his muscles flexing with effortless strength. Lucy smirked, lifting a sleek combat staff. Let's see if you can keep up, human. He chuckled. You're really trying to break me, aren't you? She lunged. Their battle was brutal, electric. Their bodies collided over and over, breathless, straining. She moved like liquid fire, striking with grace. But John was relentless. Every time she expected him to yield, he countered. Every time she tried to pin him, he escaped. Until he turned the tables. In a sudden, blindingly fast move, John flipped her, his weight pressing her into the cool metal floor. His arms caged her in, his body over hers, his breath hot against her ear. Lucy's entire body went still, trapped, pinned. His voice was a whisper, rough and controlled. You don't want control over me, Lucy. Her breath caught. You want to lose it. A shiver rolled through her. Yes. Gods, yes. She lifted her head, lips just inches from his. She could feel his breath, the heat of his body pressing into hers. She was the Empire's princess, the most powerful telepath in the galaxy, and yet she had never felt more at someone's mercy than she did in that moment. For the first time, she understood what it felt like to be hunted. John's gaze flickered to her lips just for a second. Then he pulled away. Lucy remained on the floor, heart pounding, her body thrumming with something she couldn't name. John exhaled sharply, running a hand through his dark hair. His voice was rough when he finally spoke. "We should stop this." Her fingers curled into the floor. "Do you want to?" Silence. And for the first time, she heard something. A whisper. A thought. One she wasn't supposed to hear. "Gods help me, no." Her breath hitched. His mental defenses had cracked for just a moment, and she had caught a glimpse of the truth. He wanted her, and now she would shatter him. But before she could speak, the chamber's door slid open with a sharp hiss. A guard rushed in, his voice frantic. "Your Highness the Prince has arrived. Prince Varek demands to see you." Lucy's blood went cold. Varek, her arranged fiancé. She turned back to John, but his face had already hardened into that unreadable mask once more. The moment between them, gone. But the game, it was only just beginning. The moment Lucy stepped into the throne chamber, she felt the weight of her destiny pressing down on her. Prince Varek stood at the center of the room, tall and imposing, his blue skin gleaming under the ambient light of the palace. He was a warrior, one of the strongest of Zyrean nobility, his presence alone enough to demand respect. His piercing silver eyes narrowed at her approach, his expression a mixture of arrogance and suspicion. Lucy forced herself to remain calm, to keep her stride confident and measured. She was the princess of the Zyrean Empire. She did not falter, did not waver. But inside, her pulse was still thrumming with the ghost of John Carter's touch. "You've been occupied," Varek remarked, his tone cool, assessing. Lucy tilted her chin. "You called for me." His lips curved into something that might have been a smirk, but there was no warmth in it. "And yet, you made me wait." She clenched her jaw but said nothing. Varek took a slow step forward, his voice dropping. "The whispers travel fast, Lucy. I hear rumors that you have taken a special interest in the human envoy." Her stomach tightened. Varek leaned in, his voice a low growl. "Tell me it's not true." Lucy met his gaze, unwavering. She would not cower before him, would not explain herself, especially not when everything in her body still burned from her last encounter with John. "Believe what you wish," she said coolly. His eyes flashed with something dangerous. "You would dishonor the Empire for a worthless human?" A spark of fury ignited in her chest. "He is not worthless." The moment the words left her mouth, she knew she had made a mistake. Varek's features twisted in rage, and without warning, he reached out, gripping her wrist with bruising force. "You think you can defy tradition?" he hissed. "You think you can disgrace our people for some off-worlder?" Lucy's entire body tensed, power coiling inside her, ready to lash out. "Let her go!" The voice rang like thunder. She turned, her breath catching, as John Carter stepped forward from the shadows of the chamber. His stance was battle-ready, his muscles taut with restrained fury, and his dark eyes burned with something raw and unyielding. Varek's grip on her wrist tightened as he turned his attention to John. "This does not concern you, human." John's gaze didn't waver. "The hell it doesn't." Lucy could feel it now, the heat radiating from John, the sheer force of his presence. He had been holding back before, controlling himself. But now he was ready to fight. Varek sneered. "You truly think you can challenge me?" John tilted his head slightly, his lips curling into that damnably confident smirk. "I don't think, Varek. I know." And then all hell broke loose. Varek lunged first, his movements a blur of Zyrean speed and power. But John was faster than he had any right to be. He dodged, countered, and in a flash, their bodies collided. Fists flew, bones cracked. The chamber shook with the force of their fight. Lucy's heart pounded as she watched John, his skill, his brutality. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a warrior, and he was fighting for her. But Varek was Zyrean-born, bred for war. He landed a savage blow against John's ribs, sending him staggering back. Lucy felt the moment Varek decided to end it. He reached for his weapon, a Zyrean plasma blade, its edge pulsing with deadly blue fire. Number. Lucy moved before she could think, summoning her power in a crushing wave of telekinesis. The blade ripped from Varek's grasp and flew across the chamber, embedding itself in the far wall. Varek whirled on her, eyes blazing. "You would choose him over your own kind?" he snarled. Lucy took a step forward, her voice steady, unshaken. "I choose myself." And then she made her decision. She turned to John. "We need to go. Now." John, still catching his breath, wiped the blood from his lip and gave her a sharp nod. "Agreed." Varek's roar of fury filled the chamber, but Lucy had already grabbed John's hand, already summoned her power. The palace alarms blared as she and John vanished into the corridors, their escape beginning. Lucy's heart pounded, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had just committed treason against her own empire, and she didn't regret it for a second. The stolen starship hurtled through hyperspace, the universe blurring into streaks of violet and white beyond the cockpit windows. The alarms from their escape still echoed in Lucy's ears, her body still thrumming with the aftermath of her betrayal. She had just defied an empire. She had just abandoned her throne. She had just chosen John Carter over everything she had ever known. And now, she had to live with that choice. John sat in the pilot seat, one hand gripping the controls, the other pressed against his bruised ribs. Blood trickled from a cut along his jawline, but his expression remained unshaken. Focused. "You all right?" he asked, glancing at her. Lucy exhaled sharply, leaning back against the cool metal of the ship's hull. "I should be asking you that." He smirked, wincing slightly. "I'll live." Silence fell between them, the weight of everything settling in. They were fugitives now, hunted. There was no turning back. Lucy's fingers curled into fists. "I just declared war on my own people." John studied her for a long moment. Then quietly, he said, "No, you just declared war on a future you never wanted." Her breath hitched. Damn him. He always saw too much. The navigation system beeped, breaking the tension. John glanced at the readings. "There's a habitable moon a few systems away. We'll lay low there, figure out our next move." Lucy nodded, pressing a hand to her temple. She should be planning, strategizing, but all she could think about was the way John had stood between her and Varek, the way he had fought for her, the way his presence set her blood on fire. She had spent her life bending others to her will, but John Carter, he had undone her. The moment they landed on the moon's surface, Lucy knew they were alone. Alara 7 was uninhabited, its sky a swirl of deep purples and silver mist. Towering rock formations jutted from the terrain, glowing plants casting a faint blue light across the landscape. A river of liquid starlight cut through the valley, reflecting the twin moons overhead. It was breathtaking and dangerous. John activated the ship's security systems before turning to her. "We'll need shelter. There's a cave formation nearby that should give us some cover." Lucy nodded. Her mind screamed that she should focus on their survival, but her body was aching with something else entirely. She had spent too many nights obsessing over him, too many days fighting a battle she wasn't sure she wanted to win. And now, there was nothing between them but open air and the weight of unspoken words. As they made their way to the caves, John fell into step beside her, his presence electric. The silence between them was thick, charged with all the things neither of them had dared to say. Once inside, John dropped his bag, stretching his sore muscles. His combat shirt clung to his frame, damp with sweat, torn in places from their battle. Lucy swallowed hard. Control. She needed control. "You keep staring," John murmured, without looking at her. Her eyes snapped to his, heat rushing to her skin. "You're injured," she said, attempting to deflect. "You should let me." "I'm fine." Her jaw clenched. Stubborn man. Without another word, she stepped toward him. Too close, reaching for the blood on his jaw. He didn't stop her. Her fingers brushed against his skin. His breath hitched. Her gaze flickered to his lips. Damn it. Lucy. Her name on his lips sent a shockwave through her. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a command. It was a warning. But she was done fighting. She lifted her chin. "Do you still want to stop this?" John's fingers curled into fists, his entire body coiled tight, restrained. Barely. Then, finally, he broke. In a flash, she was pinned against the cool rock, John's hands braced on either side of her, his chest pressed to hers. His breath was hot against her lips, his dark eyes blazing. "You drive me insane," he muttered, voice low and ragged. Lucy smirked, despite the way her pulse thundered. "Good." And then his lips crashed into hers. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't careful. It was fire and fury, a war of mouths and tongues, a claiming neither of them had been prepared for. Lucy gasped, heat surging through her body as John took control, pressing her further against the rock, his grip tight on her waist. She had always been the one with power, the one who dictated desire, but not now. Now, she was his. Her fingers fisted in his hair, pulling him closer, drinking in the taste of him, the feel of his body against hers. Every touch, every movement undid her. She had never felt anything like this. Not power, not control, just him. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the one leading the game. And gods, she loved it. But peace never lasts. A sharp beep echoed from John's wrist communicator, breaking them apart. Lucy's breath was ragged, her lips swollen, her body aching. But she forced herself to focus. John checked the signal. His jaw tightened. They found us. Her blood went cold. Outside, in the distance, the sky lit up with the glow of approaching Zyrean warships. The Empire was coming, for both of them. The silver glow of Zyrean warships burned through the sky, their sleek, predatory forms descending through the swirling mist of Alara 7. Lucy's breath came fast, her mind racing. They had found her. They had come to take her back. John stood beside her, already reaching for his weapon, his jaw set with grim determination. He didn't hesitate, didn't falter, because that was who he was. A warrior. A man who had already accepted that his fate was tied to hers. And that truth terrified her. This wasn't just about her anymore. It wasn't just about John, either. It was about what they had become together, something raw, forbidden, and utterly unstoppable. She turned to him. We can't outrun them. John's dark eyes met hers. Then we don't run. A thrill ran through her fear, excitement, something deeper. They'll kill you, he smirked. Not if we kill them first. Gods, he was insane, and she had never wanted him more. Lucy's hands clenched into fists, her power flaring beneath her skin. No, she said. We fight for something bigger. John raised a brow. What are you thinking? Her pulse pounded as the realization hit her. Varek and the High Council won't stop hunting us unless I make them. She turned to him, voice steady, determined. I'm going back. John's eyes darkened. Like hell you are. Lucy stepped closer, gripping his forearm. I'm not surrendering, John. I'm taking the throne. His expression flickered anger, then understanding, then something deeper. You challenge Varek. She nodded. It's the only way. John exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. Then he turned to the warships approaching in the sky, his lips twisting into a slow, wicked grin. Then let's give them a welcome they won't forget. The halls of the Imperial Palace were bathed in deep violet light. The Zyrean nobles gathered in tense silence. At the center of the throne chamber stood Varek. He was clad in ceremonial armor, his silver eyes blazing with fury as he watched Lucy stride into the room. She wore no armor. She needed none. Beside her, John Carter walked like a storm, his gaze deadly, his body coiled with restrained violence. The Zyrean nobility whispered, some in shock, others in awe. No outsider had ever stood where he stood. Varek sneered. You dare return after your betrayal? Lucy's voice was steady, unshaken. I challenge you, Varek. By the laws of the Empire. Gasps rippled through the chamber. The High Council members exchanged wary glances. You challenge me for what? Varek demanded, stepping forward. Lucy lifted her chin. For my right to rule. For my freedom. For my people. Her voice hardened. For myself. Varek's fury turned into something dark and gleeful. Then you'll die for it. A pulse of power surged through the chamber. The challenge had been accepted. There was no turning back. John caught her wrist, his grip firm, grounding her. When she looked at him, he didn't speak. He didn't have to. She saw it in his eyes. Come back to me. She nodded, and then she stepped forward, into the arena of fate. The battle was brutal. Varek was faster, stronger. But Lucy was smarter. She didn't just fight with her body, she fought with her mind. She twisted around his strikes, dodging, countering. Every move was calculated, every feint designed to expose his weaknesses. And then she found it. His arrogance, his certainty that she was still the girl she had been before. She wasn't. In a blur of motion, she turned his own attack against him, her telepathic power lashing through his mind like fire. Varek staggered. Lucy struck. A final, precise blow sent him crashing to the ground, gasping for breath. Silence fell. Then the High Council spoke. The challenge is decided. And then the words she had never dreamed she would hear. The throne belongs to Princess Lucy. She had won. The Empire was hers. The people bowed. But the only thing Lucy cared about was the man standing at the edge of the chamber, watching her with that look, that damn look, that told her everything she needed to know. She crossed the chamber, stepping into John's space, breathless, victorious, utterly alive. You did it. he murmured. Lucy smirked. We did it. And then for the first time in her life, she finally heard his thoughts. I love you, Lucy. Her breath caught. She hadn't forced it. She hadn't pried it from his mind. He had given it to her, freely. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her lips. She grabbed his collar, pulling him down into her kiss, her people watching, her empire kneeling before her, because the war was over, and she had won everything. The end.